Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Stablecoin Podcast. I'm your host, Luther Midday, co-founder of Stablecoin Partners, and along with me today is our other co-founder, Rami Soleiman, also known as the Earl of Stablecoins. He's gotten a promotion since the last time we did this. So this is a super exciting episode. We have Erick Schneider from Kraken. He's the global head of payments and partnerships, and Ahmed ZifZaf from Worldpay. He's the head of crypto partnerships at Worldpay. Before we get started, a quick disclaimer: the opinions expressed here belong solely to the hosts and the guests and do not represent their organizations. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not to be taken as legal, financial, or investment advice. With that, gentlemen, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure having you here.
Thanks for having us.
Great being here, guys.
Ahmed, if we could start with you, my friend. Worldpay, trillions of dollars in settlement, right? You guys have made some amazing changes to the way that Worldpay uses stablecoins, leverages digital assets in general, supports stablecoins, supports digital asset companies. But would love to kind of get started with how you got started in this space and then how that kind of led to becoming the head of crypto partnerships at Worldpay.
Yeah. I would say from a fundamental personal level, I've traveled a lot growing up and moved around to quite a few different places. And I think if you have that type of experience, you already start to understand at an early age, what is it like to go between borders, and what is it like to understand the different economic systems, financial system, payment systems. And you really start to realize on a personal level, it's very convoluted, it's quite complex, and it's not easy to go from border to border or company to company and pay for things. That being said, a company like Worldpay has been around for a few decades, and payments evolves very quickly. So when it came to crypto and stablecoins, Worldpay has been involved in the space since 2014, providing traditional payment methods to exchanges, wallets, etc. And now over the last few years, you start to see this new evolution of, okay, what are the new primitives of how we send messages or send money across borders or to different types of companies? And a lot of what we're seeing today that's being successfully adopted or in demand is sort of these stablecoin dollar-backed solutions where you can get access to yield quicker or you can make a payment quicker. So I would say it's a very exciting time. And both on a personal and sort of professional level, you're really starting to, if you're into quickly evolving technological spaces within the financial services sector, I don't really think there's many other areas you'd want to be.
Ah, fantastic. Erick, you've been in the cross-border space for a while. While going through your profile, I have a completely separate question because you had some time at Bear Stearns, which is amazing. So that's a whole different podcast in itself. But given your experience in cross-border and then moving from there to Kraken, if you can kind of give us an understanding of how you got started, and then but really what was the aha moment for you?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I got into finance because my father was into finance. I wanted to be a fire truck driver, and then I wanted to be a superhero, but finance was the place that I ended up. Interestingly enough, very similar to Ahmed, I followed the technology. I was taking a look at what is the optimum way of transferring funds from point A to point B. And it's not because you're choosing the lowest cost service. It's not because you're choosing the one that has the largest liquidity pools. When blockchain technology came around, hearing the likes of Ripple and Stellar doing their pitches to the businesses 2017 there, for example, I'm like, hey, I think they're onto something. And that's when I jumped in. And being at the cutting edge of technology, I think is pretty darn exciting. So much so that I lost a little bit of hair, as you guys may have noticed on that part, but I love this piece. I think that it's the next wave of evolution. I don't think it's going to be different. I think it's going to be an evolution of, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Fantastic. One of the things that I find challenging and interesting is the fact that there is a certain amount of confusion when it comes to stablecoins. And I think the confusion comes because of the way that it works. But at the end of the day, my hypothesis is money is money. It just happens to be functioning differently, or it looks a little different than what traditional money looks like. When you look at merchants, Ahmed, how much of resistance do you get from merchants that they say, when you first approach this idea of hey, you should probably use stablecoins for settlement, etc. How much of resistance do you get from merchants on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I would say a lot of our conversations today are less of us going to merchants, pitching them stablecoins. A lot of it is them coming to us saying, hey, how can we utilize stablecoins in a way that improves our treasury management or how we do cross-border. So like, I think that's like a nice way to start the conversation. I would say like in the beginning, so like the companies that were much more, I would say, forward thinking over the last few years, a lot of it was they wanted greater access to dollar. And stablecoins are sort of like one of the easiest ways to get access to dollar, especially if you're running more a crypto native business where you can hold in stables or do other things that you might want to do, lending, trading, whatever it might be. The second wave, who might be more resistant to stablecoins, I think a lot of the question starts to become like how legitimate and how scalable are these technologies? So, a company like Worldpay, we do $2 to $3 trillion of payment volume a year. Like there's no stablecoin that really does that level of payment sort of turnover. So it becomes a little bit of a question of like, where do you start your pilots? Where do you start your experiments? Where do you scale out your big bets? And I think a lot of that is coming down to like emerging markets. Like that is where you're seeing the strongest demand for dollar, for this type of technology. There's always a lot of questions of like the end consumer when they have these assets, what can they do with it? These are also the regions that are accelerating the most in terms of crypto payment acceptance. So then like that use case sort of gets solved pretty immediately. So I would say like we're starting very much with who is, most in demand. And I would say it's very much centered around certain regions and then certain categories. So, airlines, crypto exchanges, gambling companies, those are all the ones that like I would say today, like their businesses are most impacted by like rising cost of capital, and their user base or customer base is very fluent in sort of like new technology and new payments. So I think like we're already seeing a lot of demand there, and like that's where we'll continue to push, and then sort of wait and see on the other industries and regions, like how they start to approach this type of solutions.
When you say like, from a market's perspective, I think it's beyond geographies, right? Like you said, it's not just different, like is it LATAM or Africa, but it's also different sectors of the merchant space, as you kind of talked about, right? Like airlines, etc. But it's interesting because you brought this up, because there's a really interesting quote by you, Eric, that I was able to pull out. It said something like, the moment a PSP can reconcile a stablecoin the same way it can reconcile a wire, adoption goes parabolic. And so we're starting to see that. We're definitely starting to see that with the likes of WorldPay. From a Kraken perspective, how do you guys actually facilitate or enhance this PSP's experience from that perspective in general, right? As an exchange, and now you're a qualified custodian. So there's so much more that Kraken has tacked on beyond just being an exchange. And I feel like you guys are making that reconciliation piece something that's not like in the future, but it happens today. And I'd love for you to kind of expand on that.
Sure. So it's an interesting topic because we're not just providers, but we're also the users. So on the using side there, for example, guess what? I'm pushing my buddy Ahmed over there all the time with WorldPay, saying, how can we leverage stablecoins? What is the benefit to us as a merchant ourselves there? So we drink the proverbial Kool-Aid. On the infrastructure side, you're absolutely right, Luther, in which we have tried to expand our use case. We've tried to expand our infrastructure in order to meet the demands of the growing use cases. And it's still nascent, I would say, but it's getting big. Interestingly enough, we've gotten a lot of feedback on, all right, we want our own stablecoin and we want to list it. And before we're like, okay, that's fine. Now we're asking, why though? What's the overall objective? And the reason is we're starting to grow up. A million years ago, by the way, this was a year and a half ago, we had the original thought of, hey, should we launch our own stablecoin? And we made a strategic decision not to. And the rationale was, what is our overall objective? Yeah, we want to make money, of course, but we want that stablecoin to be out there in the world. We want there to be a growth in market cap. We want adoption. We don't just want to bully our partners into using this. Looking at a couple of stable coins on that one, by the way. Such, we joined a consortium. And you may have seen the news. We announced Global Dollar Network that we were a founding member with USDG in October of 2024. But since then, and we've done great things with USDG, we have become much more stablecoin agnostic. We've signed an agreement with Circle, for example, only recently. And this is to be a very strategic player, but it's also not just to say, hey, look, we're doing what our competitor is doing. It starts with C and ends with Coinbase without saying any names there, for example. But what we're doing there is we're trying to follow the trend of what the market needs are. And we've identified, just like you had said, Luther, we can't just be a one-trick pony saying, hey, we're agnostic, it's over here. We're going to provide custody. We're going to facilitate liquidity on our platform. We're going to supply interoperability, for example, of you want USDC, but there's USDG in the markets, and you want to consolidate and pay someone in USDT, and then ETANA and all these other different stable coins that are out there. Absolutely. We can facilitate a lot of that, and we continue to work on that infrastructure. What I would say is we're not done. There's more in the pipeline, and it is one of the 237 projects that Kraken has been prioritizing.
Maybe I could just say something here. This is what's very, very exciting. I think what we've seen is a major maturity in the last sort of year and a half, I think, in terms of your building for financial services, period. You're not building solutions for the crypto ecosystem to harvest the stablecoin project. You're looking for how can Kraken service people who want to use this technology, full stop, not just for crypto speculation, the traditional use case of an exchange, or just get margin onto an exchange, or do that kind of fungible collateral for trading purposes. This is just much more mature, to crossing the chasm from the original use case to now the developing and arguably much more bigger use case. And same with Ahmed. Ultimately it's sort of Worldpay is doing things and I didn't realize, actually I was surprised that you've been in the space in 2014. I didn't realize Worldpay had been in crypto, so that's excellent to hear. But it's the same deal. I think it's how do we get to a stage where stablecoins are the infrastructure that powers $2 trillion worth plus of volume. And we're getting there now, with the work that you're doing and the projects. I'm not sure which one is stablecoin related in 237, but, ultimately you're moving in the right direction to service exactly what Ahmed needs effectively so that he can service the whole world in terms of the payments. And it doesn't need people to be fluent in crypto to be able to benefit from stablecoins, I think. So this obfuscation is starting to happen a lot more now. I think, one of the things me and Luther have been seeing over the last few weeks of the people we've been interviewing and just the developments in the market has been sort of the amount of technology that's making it easier for people to interact with stablecoins, not realizing they're using stablecoins, or there's debit cards, credit cards linked to stablecoins in some way, shape, or form, and you guys are at the vanguard of all of that. Actually, you're doing it. So, no, really, kudos to both of you.
Well, I appreciate that, Rami, and you used a lot bigger words than I could, so you were much more articulate on this part. But you're spot on one key point in which the use case shift, I think, is transformational for stablecoins. Right. So we used USDT and USDC as an easy way to, when you're making tons of money on Bitcoin, instead of converting it back to fiat and then having to get back into crypto, that's when you used stable coins. And it generated some significant volume, right? USDC, USDT are still the incumbents that a lot of stable coins are compared to. That said, the utility has grossly shifted, and it's just a simple use case piece of, you could use it for trading, but you can use it also for cross-border payments, for settlements, for example, for the likes of Worldpay's merchants. But this opens up the gate of so many different merchants entering it. And to your point, Rami, and we've seen a lot of this, no one gives two shits how a stablecoin works. They just want to make sure that it does, and it adheres to the fact that it is in fact faster and it is in fact less expensive. And it's up to companies like Kraken, Worldpay, the likes that provide infrastructure in order to deliver on that promise.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So I had the pleasure of quoting you, Eric. There's a really fun quote for Ahmed, actually. He said, I think yours is, merchants don't care about blockchain. They just care about settlement finality and working capital efficiency, which is 100% correct. That's today, I always tell people, when you land in some country and then you turn on your phone, it just connects to a network. Right? You don't have to sit there and be like, let me figure out the technology by which it's doing and do some authentication. It just connects, and then you're able to make phone calls. And it's crazy how much how much we've gotten used to the overused word interoperability of payments that exists today in traditional finance. And I think like getting blockchain digital assets to that same level of interoperability is going to be how I think the true adoption happens, is because when people don't really know about the technology, they're just able to see the positive effects of it, right? From that perspective. I want to go back to something that you said, Eric, which is, you said, hey, when somebody says, I want to launch a stablecoin, you say, why do you want to launch a stablecoin? I have a thinking around this, and I'd love to get your thoughts and, of course, Ahmed thoughts from this perspective, which is, I think any company that holds on to any sort of funds for X amount of time probably benefits from having some kind of treasury token. Maybe it's not a stable coin, but some kind of tokenized treasury that they kind of use to manage their treasury, whether it's within their four walls. And those four walls could be a headquarters and 15 subsidiaries. It could be like something like that where it's complex, right? But then maybe that token is not used as a stablecoin outside of those four walls, but for reconciliation, for managing their own treasuries, I think there's value to it. Do you guys see Do you guys see the world similarly? So it's not a stablecoin again. It's not everybody launches a stablecoin, but at least there's tokenized treasuries. And then when they want to actually, if I want to send you money, I use an actual stablecoin. I'd love to kind of bring this topic to your thoughts.
So this reminds me of the saying in Thailand, same but different. It's, are we talking about fiat? Are we talking about stablecoin? Are we talking about short-term treasury notes? Doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
I think you hit it on the nail, Luther. So the ultimate use cases are companies want to optimize the revenue generated on cash that's sitting there. And for ones that are sitting in 9 digits, 10 digits, more there, for example, companies like ours, that's really important. But the second one is reconciliation, making sure that we're clear. And it's how much USDT is held versus USDG versus US dollar versus EUR there. And it's like how to reconcile all of those is going to be very important. And the third one is fungibility. How do we leverage this? Do we have to sell it and then withdraw and then burn something in order to send this piece over? No, it's you want to be like, and the last possible second, I want to transfer it over here. And I think the first two, stable coins, tokenized, for example, like what Citibank does, for example, those work. But when it comes to that third one of, I want Ahmed to help me receive USDG for the card acquiring that we're doing through, and vice versa. I want to sell. I want the last possible second so I can make every last penny that I possibly can. And that, I think, is still one of the challenges. And this is where it comes to, you've got hundreds of stable coins out there. And I think a lot of it is much more of an ego play than it is of a strategic one. If you had the Treasury folks, just like you were talking about, Luther, in the room and saying, these are the use cases, these are the needs that we want, we would have a very different landscape of stable coins that we have now. Versus today, it's, we're doing this type of company, and look how cool and edgy we are, we're doing a stable coin. I can't even spell most of the ones that they have, and like capitalized and small, this stuff. Listen, I'm not that smart. I don't want to complicate things like that. And so prediction for the future, we're going to have a lot fewer stable coins, but I think we're going to have stable coins that are going to be quite robust, much more regulated, and much more interoperable.
Yeah.
Well put.
We're running out of letters, or we have run out of letters, haven't we, for extensions for dollar already?
I'm starting to see 5-letter stablecoins, actually.
I know. No, but you're exactly right. And I think, there's also, I guess, we're still in the infancy of the maturation of the problem with the stablecoin is that it's really quite a fluid instrument, in terms of there's a payment token element, there's a yield-bearing element, there's tokenized trade. They all they flow into each other, actually. And so from a corporate treasury perspective, he can be split, jumping between 2 or 3 versions of the same thing. And we just need to make that process pretty fluid. So, and I think another development that's happened is over the last at least 18 months has been the the maturation of the tokenized treasury products that are available. You know, a few years ago it was maybe just Benji. Now there's Biddle. Now there's there's a few more that are entering the scene. You know, I think Apollo have Accurate and so on. So there's a few options now that have familiar faces and names and brand names and logo. And I think you're right. Really, why is Worldpay so successful? Because, you know, trust. You know, why is Kraken successful? Because people trust the logo and trust the money. And I think, you know, to your point, it's very difficult for people to generate trust if there's 1,700 versions of the same thing that all are shouting, trust my money, trust my money. So I think you're right. There's going to be a consolidation there of stable coins, and the ones that will start to get exit velocity in the new world are the ones that can prove that they're robust, that they're regulated, that they follow the right standards and so on. And because the audience is different, you know, the audience is now the real world. The audience is not crypto, where they've got to sort of choose the most suboptimal solution because there isn't any other option, and actually it's that or nothing. Here, the alternative is real money, you know, and so this is why I think, the next year or so is going to be very interesting to see how this develops. I wanted to ask you both in terms of, like, how do you feel, you know, we've got regulatory tailwinds, certainly being led by the states and other jurisdictions that have helped this turnaround with the Genius Act and so on. How do you feel the Genius Act will help stabilize demand for more robust stablecoins going forward? How much do you think that has caused the inflection point into traditional finance for stablecoins? Do you think it's a good springboard for more development in sort of blockchain market structure? Like, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, at least from a Worldpay perspective, I think absolutely. Like, you have global merchants who have big operations in the US who for the first time are saying, you know, this is like a real opportunity for me to really explore. Taking off my Worldpay hat a little bit, and, you know, Eric and I were on a panel in Mexico on stablecoins, and we talked about geopolitical risk. This is like where I see more of like the long tail sort of, like, I don't think we're talking enough about this, but, you know, as big corporations really start to adopt this, you're basically putting a lot of dollars into cross-border accounts that typically wouldn't have access to those same dollars. And I think from a regulatory perspective, if you look globally, I think you'll probably start to see a little bit of pushback in a lot of those regions. And that's something I think, you know, moving really quickly and moving at scale, I think can accelerate, you know, where regulation goes, but it could also lead to, you know, some hiccups when you land and expand. Yeah. Circumventing capital controls, you know, ultimately they're there for a reason, you know, and generally those countries have a serious risk of, dollarization and irrelevance for their currencies. So yeah, it's a tightrope that needs to be followed that can grow that scale. You know, if you want to throw in geopolitical stuff, there's obviously the BRICS countries, and the East is obviously wanting a counterpoint to the West, you know. So I'm in the UAE, we have a dollar pegged currency effectively, but it's still got its foot in both camps at the end of the day, you know, in terms of where the political shifts are going. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that works. And if you think about stablecoins, like, what are they? It's like, okay, we're just saying that, hey, we don't want to use existing payment rails. We want to create our own sort of end-to-end peer-to-peer endpoints. So then you are really creating a geopolitical money product, which is saying, no, use my lanes to make your payments because it's cheaper, faster, better, makes you more money. Or I'm just going to tell you have to use it if you want to buy these real world products. Yeah. So I think, like, that's, like, for me, the next level of sophistication will be this competition element. So for me, it's even less of, there's all these different corporate enterprise stablecoins that are launching and competing. You're going to start to get into, okay, what is the actual geopolitical implications of these corporations adopting this type of technology and having a lot more control over the monetary supply, over how companies can transact with each other or individual users, which I think is, like, intellectually very interesting. I think obviously on a day-to-day level, it's like you don't really have to operate at that problem area because, you know, it's just hard enough to get Treasury teams to understand what products we're using and why we're using them, and then for them to implement that across legacy systems. I mean, Erick's in a great spot. You have a company that's, you know, very modern, innovative, a lot of people who, like, understand what they're doing. we have a lot of merchants that have been around for like over 100 years. They've come from, the very early primitives of financial instruments to like now we're telling them about, new stuff. Like that, like inflection point, I think is pretty interesting because how easy is it for them to actually mess with tokenized deposits? And I don't think very easy. So like, how do we as an industry make it really easy for them to get access to those products where it's native within their payment flows, reconciles, well, and all of that good stuff. I think that's where a lot of the challenge exists today, probably, if you want to go after that segment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you think you've got to get it so that it's integrated into the treasury management systems of these corporates at a base. You need to abstract it or just integrate it so that they just see dollars, or they just see a singular currency, and then, if synthetically behind it, it's made up of, stable coins and so on, so be it, and they can break it down. But if it doesn't go in there, it goes back to Erick's earlier point. If they can't reconcile, no one wants to manage a on-chain treasury operation and an off-chain treasury operation. That's not how, they're not built for that. So, we have a job as crypto to make that role easier. But actually, I wonder if I could go back to an earlier point, Ahmed, in terms of the around the geopolitical side. Do you think that potentially that's an offshoot of why some of the stablecoin companies are trying to own the process? Circle Payments Network owning the tech stack rather than the distribution.
It's down to the L1 level. You want to capture absolute value.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's definitely a strategy. And I think everyone has their own strategy. Erick talked about being agnostic on a stablecoin level. I think Worldpay has somewhat of a similar approach. I think for us, we want to pick the very best and, we want to grow and win with them. But yeah, for a lot of companies, I think, payments, again, is somewhat commoditized. So it's like, how do you add value? It's like you want to create more and more value that's easy to get access to. So having, your own L1, your own gateway, your own, like, I'm sure it won't hurt, but obviously, like, there's a lot of implications to what that is. Like, what is your core competency? What do your merchants actually need and desire? Like, are you adding a lot of additional costs unnecessarily? There's this idea of corporate chains that I'm starting to think about. Like, are we just moving into an area where, we're not decentralized at all? It's all about service, and we're just reflecting existing payment networks, but on chain now. I'm not sure where it's going to go.
Yeah, it's actually super interesting because there's two topics that I think both of you guys touched on, which, Erick, I'd love for you to weigh in on this because I think topic number one is I'm a strong believer that while the existence or proliferation of US dollar stable coins is going to be high, there's going to be a rampant increase of non-US dollar stable coins that's needed for on-chain FX, right? On-chain FX swaps that I think we're starting to see a little bit, but I think they'll increase quite a bit. And that's how we actually get to using the true value of like a blockchain from that perspective with instant atomic swaps, etc. That doesn't happen today. The second thing is I completely agree with you, Ahmed, that I think centralization is happening, right? Like, what is the biggest, the largest growing off-ramp? It's cards. Right, the best growing off ramp today for most digital assets is cards. Where we're seeing most of the treasury accumulation is around a few stable coins, right? So there's centralization happening, even though we all set up for decentralization. I'd love to get your take on the Erick, on the non-US dollar stable coins and US dollar stable coins.
Absolutely. Okay. So we have seen the exact same thing. So traipsing around the world, working really hard at conferences, eating delicious food, and taking drinks until way too late at night. I've learned quite a bit. One of them is, yes, there has been a significant growth of stable coins, which originally was thought, it's never going to happen. Right? Stable coins are made for very large and liquid currencies, US dollar, euro, that's it. Not the case at all there. However, there are some caveats on that. So while we have hundreds of stablecoins being done on the USD, and Donald Trump saying that the proliferation of stablecoins has been huge for the growth of the dollar and the support of the dollar, I think that there are some strategic reasons why we're going to see this. So when we take a look at Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, that are all launching their own stablecoin, they're not going to be tons of them. They're not going to be the same amount of different projects launching stablecoins. I think that's a good thing from a liquidity standpoint, from a utility standpoint, from a credibility standpoint. I think it's key, but it's for that exact same use case, Luther, that you're referencing, which is, all right, we've got the US dollar stablecoin, but now what? Do we have to send the US dollar stablecoin to Brazil and they're going to hold that and then they're going to have the FX in the last mile anyway? Or now we can do the FX on chain with a lot less friction, a lot more speed, and a lot more fungibility if we have to go back and forth very often, which, a company like Worldpay, for example, is going to be more sophisticated in this knowledge than I'll be. But you're going to be netting back and forth. As much as you're going to be collecting funds in emerging markets, you're going to be having to disperse funds in, and having that ability to convert in and out of them is going to be a huge boon. That said, I don't think they're going to be huge liquidity for these. I don't think that there are going to be 25 different options to choose from. You're going to have 5, 3. You really only need one good one, right? But having the ability to have a redundancy in the market, I think, is going to be important. But let's start with phase 1 at least.
Yeah, I completely agree.
No, I was going to say that, and I think in, say, countries like Brazil, they'll find it even more difficult because real-time payment systems are so good. Their PIX is extremely abundant, prolific, efficient. It's all of these things. Yeah. So, it actually reduces the use case of a stablecoin further to it is seriously just a cross-border payment mechanism here. I think domestically, why would someone use a stablecoin in Brazil?
Okay, yes, but absolutely no at the same time. Here's my thought process on that, Remy. So sure. Yes, you're absolutely right. You take a look everywhere. You see PIX. You see the salesperson who's selling ice creams and cheap sunglasses on Copacabana Beach. Like, here's my PIX. Read it, and your payment. But that's not exactly the ideal use case for stablecoins anyway, right? Like, it's not going to be a peer-to-peer functionality. When we have an SME who is buying the little tiny thong bikinis from Brazil to sell to girls in Ohio and the United States, for example, they have to find a way to do the settlements in between. And that's where I think that operability is more relevant. Until we get PIX operability globally, so we have a global PIX or a global SPAY or a global UPI or RTP platform, we're going to need the use of stablecoin. I think this is where it comes into play, where it really helps on the foreign exchange side. Because if you take a look at the traditional use cases, it still takes me 24 hours to repatriate funds from BRL back to USD. Good rates. Rates have improved. It's not 30 days like card settlements do. And Ahmed, keep me honest, I think that's still the case for Brazil. But it's still T+1. And every single day, my mustache gets one more gray hair. I'd love to get it that exact same day. And this is where I think the local currency stablecoin can help accelerate the process.
Yeah, that's spot on. And for those of our listeners who just listen to us and don't watch the video, you got to watch the video for Erick's mustache. Like, if there's any reason to watch this episode, there it is. You got to watch it for Erick's mustache. Something that I think is, I used to work for Worldpay back in the day, and most of my time, and most of my career has been spent in merchant services. So I have a question for you, given my knowledge of how merchant services generally work. The general process by which a merchant, right, whether it's cross-border, not cross-border, etc., the general settlement is that transaction happens, right? Somebody swipes their card, taps their card, uses it online, right? So the settlement comes from the person's bank to Visa or MasterCard or Amex. From there, it goes to the acquirer, in this case, Worldpay, and then from Worldpay to the actual merchant, right? So that's the average cycle by which settlement happens. And to Erick's point, this is like T+1, which means that it's the next business day. In some countries, I've seen it where it's worse as like T+3, right? Which is, or T+5, even like in really bad situations. So, which would mean that the merchant doesn't get settled for 3 or 4 or 10 calendar days later, right? Because it's 5 business days or whatever. So in a situation like that, but if we're switching to stablecoins, like I think the a system is only as fast as the slowest part of it, right? So even if we switch to stablecoin, even if WorldPay uses stablecoins, if Visa is still settling with you in fiat, like like WorldPay can't all of a sudden just start settling with stablecoins for something funds that they have not received. Like, am I right to say that the entire ecosystem has to kind of transform, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's more like everyone just has to start playing, part of the same team to make it go to like what you're discussing as like the real time like sort of payment model or T+0 type of model. I would say that like these like T+0 has been like a mission of payments, forever. It's
forever.
like what?
Yeah,
it's
same day
it's,
settlement. Yeah,
same day settlement, and a lot of companies have solved this through credit facilities or some sort of different sort of setup like directly with like banks or with Visa MasterCard. But I would say like today we are still somewhat restricted by like banking hours and even like weekend holidays in terms of where you can deposit funds, which then can get mint burned into stables and then sent off. So then a lot of the use case today is very much centered on, no, I just want access to dollar in like an entity that normally is more difficult for me to go get dollar, and maybe this makes it a little quicker than me having to take whatever fiat currency and then go purchase what I'm looking for. The second element is treasury management. So like there are more sophisticated companies that are wanting to use this. But yes, to your point, like if your goal is same day settlement or quick settlement, and that is like, I would say everyone is in demand for that. There's nobody who's saying, oh, no, take your time with my money. That does require, us, Visa, MasterCard, the banks, the merchant terminal being able to accept like assets. It does sort of like require all of that to be functioning. You might not have to be always using, crypto in, crypto out, but like having that functionality does allow you to accelerate when you can settle back. There is like still like a more technical issue of doing like net settlements versus batch settlements. That is a bit dependent on like the type of volume that you're, sort of targeting. Regardless of the fact, you can accelerate the process versus what exists today. So even if it's, one settlement at the end of the day or multiple settlements at like throughout the day, it's still better than, waiting a day or two to actually make sure everything is reconciled.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Maybe I could go back to Rami's question there about the Genius Act and all. So Rami, you had asked about the Genius Act, the implications in the United States. You got a very strategic and pragmatic response from Ahmed. Let me give you more of a cynical view that I have. Going back to Luther's comments at the beginning, the views expressed by this individual are exclusively my own and are not a representative of the company that I work for. I think that's an important caveat to go with. There are a lot of scary shit that I hear throughout the day. One of them is, honey, we need to talk, from my wife. The other one is, we're from the government and we're here to help. And I think it's both pros and cons that you hear about the Genius Act. So they didn't do this out of benevolence. They didn't do this because it's the right thing to do when it's a technology that we need to support. There's a strategic move behind this. I think they're leveraging this as a means to an end. Part of the hat that I can't wear outside is Make America Great Again. And they're trying to make America much more a hub and a birthplace for crypto native companies. Not just because it's great and wonderful, but because there's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of strategic piece. There's a lot of intelligence behind that part. And the IP that is being generated is strategically best to be done in that country. And this is the way I think that the Trump administration is taking a look at it. So the Genius Act is a good step forward, and it opens up the doors for, I think, a lot of different digital asset companies and different facets of the digital asset companies. I'll give you guys an idea. So I know we're talking stablecoins here, but expanding the market to digital assets. Over a year ago, I had to beg banks in the United States going, can you please help me process transactions? I will pay you tons of money. I will give you monthly minimums. What do you want? I will name my firstborn child after you. They really cared more about the money than the child piece, but whatever.
Good to know. Good to know. Yeah.
That said, after Trump, and especially after the Genius Act, this removed any concerns about financial institutions working with digital asset companies. And so it has a positive ripple effect there that we could say, in which you're seeing that there's positive impacts not only for the stablecoin industry, within digital assets, but the wider digital asset one. Having access to traditional fiat rails, reliable banking partners, for example, access to global capital, that makes everything flourish a lot further. Yeah. So I think it was a very strategic move. Ahmed's point, though, I think is 100% valid, in which now it's going to be used for political gain. Is Argentina going to restrict it because they don't want outflows of their currency? Therefore, for example, are other markets going to adopt the Genius Act because there's already a precedent for it, but they're not pro-America and they're trying to still fight off tariffs? Is the next administration after the Trump administration going to reverse anything? That, to me, I think are big concerns, because as it opens up doors, it also closes windows. Oh, there's a sophisticated thing that I learned in 3rd grade there, right? But it's an interesting one, because at one point, like, we're talking about opening up doors, that whole stablecoin component that we're talking about, all of a sudden, now that it's more mainstream, let's say, we don't need the Paxoses and the Tethers and the Circles of the world to reinvent wheels. We just need to take a look at, well, how do you optimize at this point? And one of the things that I've seen, and coming from the Money 2020 conference, is banks are getting into this. And I think this is an important paradigm shift where we see banks are not fast, but they're the ones that have the money, right? And Luther, to your point before about having that interoperability and leveraging treasuries and trust, banks have those in spades. And so if we see banks getting involved into the stablecoin space, I think that could be transformative for stablecoins and a little nerve-wracking for companies like Circle. But all to say, I do think that that Genius Act is not just a cool piece of paper that was signed and has a very niche opportunity. I think it opens doors and closes windows.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there. So brilliant. I mean, in terms of, let's take them quickly before they jump out of my mind. In terms of Genius, absolutely right. I think, being able to bring back that innovation that rightly had actually left. There was a lot of innovation in crypto that left the US because of the previous regime, and now they just find a way back to go home. I think that's super strategic, very, very clever. I think that, if you listen to like Austin Campbell and you hear about Choke Point 2.0 or Caitlin Long and all these people, this was the first sort of acknowledgement that, the tacit acknowledgement that had happened. And, your anecdote in terms of having the difficulty and then suddenly having the ease of being able to open basic banking services just underpinned how fragile even the biggest players in this space. I think people didn't recognize, and, you saw it with the Circle DPEG, with SVB and all the rest of it, how fragile all of the biggest operators in crypto were, whether they were based in the US or were based abroad. Actually, more if they were based in the US. They were ironically even more fragile than they were with the ones based outside of the US, which was crazy. So it's really, really important to touch on all of those. But then also the other thing that you mentioned in terms of this paradigm shift, this dichotomy between the banks and the stablecoin issuers, stablecoins versus tokenized deposits. So obviously the Genius Act has effectively prevented stablecoin issuers issuing yield directly to their customers. And obviously we talked about that earlier, that there's ways around it, rewards and all the rest of it. There's loopholes, and these are the windows that I guess that are opening. The door's opening and the windows are closing, but either way, someone's finding a way through to do what they wanted to do to achieve the objective. But banks have the head start in trust. Banks also have the head start in deposits as well, and they're not going to give up the deposit flight without a fight, So it's important to see. Yeah, I'm fascinated to see how the legislation will sort of develop. Do you think it will be a competitive landscape out there, or do you think that the banks have already sort of entrenched a strong position when they were negotiating for the Genius Act to be drafted in its current form?
Oh, they had their fingers in that pie right from the get-go. Absolutely. And, taking a look at Jamie Dimon, and I hope he doesn't cancel my checking account there. But, he says one thing negative about stablecoins and he rushes to build it on this side at the same time, right? What I think is interesting is I think that banks are not slow to think. I think they're slow to execute, but they have a very clear vision of how this can work out for them. And I think they have a roadmap in place. what I've heard from speaking with them is they have broken this down into a pyramid. And being a very visual person, you've got peer-to-peer payments at the bottom of the pyramid, and this represents around $1 trillion. More money than I have in my bank account, but it's negligible relative to the B2B payments that are in the second part. But this second part can also be broken down into two. You've got the SME layer over here, and then you've got the Fortune 100s right at the top. Interestingly enough, the SME layer is around 4 trillion, and then you've got like 35 trillion, and that number could be 25 or 42, depending on which report that you see, but it's tens of trillions of dollars at the top. Banks care about this top part right up over here, and especially this top niche part. And I think the way that they're seeing this is very similar to what Ahmed was discussing before about how merchants are evolving and the needs are, and then merchants are going to Worldpay, for example, saying, all right, I want this type of functionality. How can you help me get it? Same thing that banks are seeing on this side, but they're seeing it from a very holistic view on how do they manage the relationship. They're not just doing the treasury components for, the large companies, Spoogle and Retflix and the other names that I'm not officially going to be supporting on over here. But if you take a look at their services, they're getting payroll, they're getting corporate cards, they're getting cash management, they're getting treasury, they're getting cross-border payments, they're getting lending from these, both secured and unsecured. And so it's not going to be imperative that they shave off 5 basis points for transfers from Ghana to Eritrea, for example, anytime soon. But I think that if they're taking a look at the transfers between other emerging markets, which has a lot more friction, a lot more cost, inefficiencies, for example, delays in settlement, this is something that is eventually going to come to play. And I think banks are going to start at the top. You've got the startups that are going to start in the middle. Ahmed, you tell me where Worldpay is going to play, because I'm guessing that they've got footholds in both of those. And we've already seen some of the companies, like my friends based in Miami at Felix Pago, that have started on the peer-to-peer transfer side and leveraging this. But I don't think that any of this is at large scale yet.
Yeah. Well, as Egyptians, you had me and Ahmed at Pyramid. We enjoyed that. So that's good.
There you go. That's the only visual we need for this.
It's the only visual we need. But
That's
I'd love to hear Ahmed's view on this.
Like just in terms of like the financial institutions and how they're entering the space.
Where do you live in the pyramid?
It's like an interesting question, and I think if you ask me in like 3 or 4 months, it will be a kind of a different answer. But I mean, Worldpay's bread and butter is like enterprise. Like our customers are basically the Fortune 100 of like the global world, and you can think of also like the governments, all of the big entrenched businesses who went online like 20, 30 years ago. Those are Worldpay's customers and continue to be Worldpay's customers. We innovate, obviously, so like many people don't know, but like, as you mentioned, about 10 years ago, we started working with crypto companies. And like that's grown into like sort of, why I get to do what I get to do today, which is just focusing on just like crypto native sort of like solutions, projects, sort of like what the future looks like. So I would say like we're very much on that enterprise level. And that's sort of like, I can't remember who said it, but like, not slow to, I think Eric, we're not slow to the vision, but like slow to execution. It is like a big, it is a big organization that you can tilt and influence like how it's moving, but like to hit the accelerator, it doesn't necessarily always make sense. Because if we went and really exploded what we were doing in 2021, maybe a lot of those same companies we were launching with might not necessarily be the same ones we would launch with today. So I think taking like a very measured approach and like launching these sort of use cases in tandem with merchants is like where we like have seen the most success. I would say next year, though, like we will have a large SME sort of orientation, most likely, just due to sort of like the changing dynamics at WorldPay. But yeah, I think the enterprise is also like a lot of those enterprises supply the bottom of the pyramid. So it's kind of like an interesting little cycle and flow. Like we support a lot of remittance companies who ultimately are the ones like your friends in Miami innovating at that level. So we do find ourselves to be like kind of thought partners across that pyramid. Because like at the end of the day, everyone is like, kind of to your question earlier, Luther, like how many people need to be able to work with stablecoins for this to really work on same day finality? It's the same sort of thing with this pyramid. For an entire society to really be benefiting from a new like technology primitive, we all need to be able to transact. Like when I traveled to, where is it, El Salvador, that was sort of what I was expecting the first time I went in early or late 2021. And it's like not quite there, or wasn't quite there at the
Yeah.
time. And I think having that sort of full end-to-end flow from a individual business government perspective is really like the holy grail of, okay, is this an actual technology trend, or is this like the new paradigm that we're all operating on?
That makes sense. When we talk about the pyramid, right? To Erick's point, there is like, the typical like M0, and like where money, when we look at the different layers of money, like, because today, no, I don't think any four of us here are actually affected by how the banks actually pass money between themselves, right? Like, as long as it's happening somehow or the other, like what I'm saying, like, we don't dictate that. We only know if something wrong happened there, and like for some reason something didn't show up in my bank account, right? But we don't really like interact with that M0 level, like the top level of money movement. So Ahmed, to your point, like I think like it is like adoption at that level means a whole different thing than adoption at the bottom level, which is the P2P side, right? For what Erick was talking about. One thing that I wanted to kind of point out, like, I'll admittedly say I got this wrong, right? I got this wrong. If you had asked me even 2 to 3 years ago, and you said, hey, why would any large enterprise adopt blockchain or digital assets? I would have said, instant to near instant finality, 24/7, right? And so easy to, and it's transparent, right? Totally transparent, which means that it's very easy to show regulators where what is going from, is going from point A to point B, and then 50 hops ago where it was, and all that. It's the regulatory world's, dream to have a solution where they could see everything so transparently. But I got this wrong, and I'll really say this because now what we're seeing is that it's not, most institutions are looking for privacy, even though they're using on-chain assets, right? So they're like, and I'm pointing towards like the growth of Canton Network. I am a huge fan of Canton Network. I'm surprised if you go to their website and you see the number of partners that they have everybody. They have, JP Morgan, they have, Goldman Sachs, they have oil companies. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this. Ahmed, maybe to start from your side, like, using stablecoins, yes, merchant settlement, they're coming to you and saying, hey, we'd like to get, do you also see a growth of them saying, yeah, but I don't want everybody to know how much you're settling me, right? Like I need some kind of privacy around this, even though it's on chain. Like, are you starting to get some of that inquiries?
Yeah, I mean, I'll preface by saying we work very closely with Canton. We run validators in Canton, like also very much like bullish on use cases where you are creating sort of walled-ish gardens where you're able to provide privacy, compliance, bespoke sort of, at the very core level, technology primitives that certain enterprises might need. I think it's a really great group and what they're trying to accomplish. I would say privacy is important. But again, like I don't think anyone is coming to blockchain necessarily purely for privacy. It's like part of the added benefits of like what you're going for. And I think also like L1s, they're very quick to compete against each other on sort of any sort of element. So now everyone is talking about private payments. But like they're even, we don't need an L2 to do that. We can do it at the L1 level. So now it starts much more of a technical discussion of how much do you care, where the information is being stored. Because like hypothetically speaking, you could use an L2 today that is privacy oriented and still utilize like the Ethereum blockchain, and, like you don't have to worry about anything. So I do think a lot more of the success will still come down to like, what is your commercial alignment? Like, how have you built your technology and sort of services with those companies and ecosystems? So I like, for me, I view Canton and like you said, these are all the great partners. That for me is usually more important than, is it more private than any other chain? Because I want to know like what the network effects are, which is, why I also am a big champion at Worldpay of USDG that Erick was mentioning earlier, is because you are coming in with like a network of partners, which means if I want to do any sort of use case between partners, it's much easier because we're using a similar asset base.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
I wanted to ask a quick question at this point, because we've talked about potentially this explosion of stablecoins, but we have a lot of blockchains as well. Do you think there's going to be a consolidation of these? Because I don't know whether it's sustainable to have, 50, 100, 200 different blockchains. Because as you said, Ahmed, really the success of anything is due to the power of the network. How can you get scalable network effects to get that exit velocity? Whether it's Visa or any kind of primitive from 30, 40 years ago, it all worked on the same thing. We need to get the network going. How do you do that? Well, I guess maybe interoperability solves that thing, but how's that going to play out? And also another point, I guess, people are very quick to want instant receipt. How many people are quite good or want to instantly send? I wonder whether that's sort of an interest as well, because ultimately, again, it's sort of what we are offering with instant finality is a changing of the economics, a transfer of the economics, ultimately, from the people who are holding onto the money to the people who have to send the money. So once you change that, actually, I'd like to receive money from Luther and not have to pay out my payroll for I know I can send it instantly, but I might not want to actually, but I want to receive from my customers their money. So how do you manage those tensions? Where do you see those sort of, what's going to happen in the future there? I feel like I don't feel that's resolved fully either.
Yeah. I mean, I love these questions, and I think we should talk more about this stuff because there's a tremendous amount of money, smart people all tackling each one. And it's sometimes to me, I'm like, I wish you guys would just consolidate your efforts because we'd probably get a lot quicker to whatever solution we're going to end up with. On the L1, L2 level, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing that everyone wants to launch their own one or there's tremendous investment already in it, because that usually means that, we are in a capitalistic market. The winner will win. You can very much, and the transparency of these systems are nice too. You can see literally what volume is, what token price is, what usage is. So I think in a very sort of meritocratic way, hopefully, you'll basically have winners, and then hopefully there will be consolidation of the best parts of each chain that were sort of developed. On the second point, I think it's really interesting because I ask my friends all the time who are like us into crypto, work in crypto, et cetera, how many of us are actually paying with stablecoin? And, some of us all have, maybe a Revolut card or, MetaMask card or whatever, and have it and are using it. A lot of it is, I have some gains and I don't want to deal with, off ramping. Let me just buy some stuff on it. But it's a great question of okay, let's just say there is fraud. I'm robbed and I need to, return, the payment. And if there is absolute finality, there's no chargeback, which is interesting from an enterprise perspective. That's the pitch to merchants. Hey, you don't have to deal as much with chargeback and fraud and risk. But then as a consumer, you're like, oh, I actually do like a little bit of protection on that respect. So I don't think it's solved. I think you probably will have certain purchases you use your crypto and stablecoins with, and certain purchases where you're much more comfortable using fiat and credit card. And I think that's how I view it at Worldpay is we have alternative payments. Crypto is another addition to it. On the back end, can we use this technology to make things go quicker? But at the end of the day, we're still thinking of the assets separately until it really is, completely merged.
I was going to say, you make a good point, because it's like the meme that you see sometimes. It encapsulates Gen Z or millennials as sort of, there's certain payments. That's a laptop payment. That's not a mobile payment.
Yes.
There's a threshold where it becomes it's big enough that I can't do that on my mobile anymore. That needs me to think about it because it's big money. So I wonder whether it's sort of the same sort of tipping point where, okay, small money, I don't mind doing it on chain. That's fine. There'll be a tipping point. No, I need to use real money.
People do with credit cards already, within credit cards, right? I have this card for this card for this. I really do think it probably will come down on a payment side where it's I want to use on the consumer side where they are choosing between, I don't know, Algorand is offering me 2% on this type of payment. I think you might start to see something in that respect from a consumer lens.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, that has to be one of the differentiators. But just starting to wrap up, guys. For other PSPs, or if you looked at other large institutions that are looking to start the adoption of digital assets, Eric, let's start with you. What are maybe some things that you would maybe not advise, but you'd say hey, here's some good starting points around the usage of digital assets, getting comfortable with digital assets, and things like that. Where would they start?
All right, so Professor Schneider engaged there, and how I would see doing something like this. The first one is speak to the folks who actually deal in the finance departments. Don't go for an ego project there. But at the same time, while you're looking for utility and finding something that works with that, find something strategic. And this ties into, Rami, your point about Why would a company want to go into a space like this if there are concerns? That whole chargeback thing, I'm 100% like I'm still a credit card user when it comes to like the big boy stuff there. To me, if you think about it, I would really like to see a strategic play where companies are not getting into it just because it bumps their stock price a little bit that day because they do an announcement of, look, we just did a thing. Look how tech savvy we are. Look how sophisticated
Forward thinking.
we are, right? We did a thing there, right? So I don't want this to be a short-term blip. I want this to be sustainable on a long-term strategy. And just like what Worldpay and Kraken have done, we can start off small. Both of us are very knowledgeable on the digital asset space, but we deal with a lot of fiat components to it. That doesn't mean we have to switch from one day to the next. Let's do this in the crawl, walk, run phase. There, for example, let's start off with a couple of use cases, a couple of corridors, for example, and see how this works. What's the level of understanding is, what the level of fungibility and flexibility we have for interoperability and all the big words that Rami was using before there, to see how this goes. The next one is making sure that you're not off the other customers, the other partners that you're working with. Now, thankfully, this is a lot less of an issue than it was a year ago, for example, where you had to be very hush-hush about anything you're doing in digital assets so you don't upset anybody. But it's still an issue, and, if you're telling someone like my dad, hey, we're using stablecoins for settlement, oh, I'm not sure I like that one bit. You're going to have to watch something like this piece. And then the last one that I will say is, don't stop learning. Speak to smart people like Ahmed on a regular basis there, and understand what the flows are going, what the potential use cases are, what the challenges are, because it's not just all and roses there, right? It's sometimes it's a little bit more challenging in there. And I think it's great to hear what your risk reward ratio is, what the concerns are, what the optimal thing is. And the last thing that I will mention is, I think you shouldn't just nice to have do this. I think you should absolutely do this. And the reason is, your competitors, your little startup companies that are trying to eat your shorts, and the guy that works for you are all doing the same thing.
Oh, you're spot on. You're spot on. I think this is, I can't remember whose quote this was, but somebody said everybody needs to have a stablecoin strategy. Otherwise, it's just like you're just losing, right? So, but as an operator, you're like, from a Worldpay perspective, or just from an Ahmed perspective, like, what are some of the gotchas that have gotten, like, you'd say companies that are getting into the space should kind of look out for, Ahmed?
Yeah, I would say like the first element is, you don't always have to make everything yourself. You don't always have to buy a company yourself. Like, there's plenty of companies out there where you can come up with your own commercial arrangements where you can get started a lot quicker. I think you just have to then get very smart on, who are the right aligned partners with what I want to achieve. To Erick's point, a lot of it is also like, what are my goals? Like, it's not enough to just say I want to get involved with stablecoins or enable a stablecoin or list a stablecoin. It's like, if you want this to be truly successful and to go from a launch to then an actual strategic, strong point that boosts your stock for the long term, if you want to call it that way, then there has to be a real value that you're targeting, whether it's making it more efficient or whether it's getting more revenue or a new customer base that you otherwise wouldn't get access to. And knowing what you're targeting, I think, is important, because you might pick different partners depending on what your goal is. If your goal is to really reduce costs and improve efficiency, maybe you go the tokenized deposit route and you're just looking at how do I improve, intra exchanges of funds. But if you're looking to improve top line revenue, maybe you're very much focused on like, what are the yield bearing assets that I can really, offer to my consumers, and how do I most benefit from them? So I would say those are like great considerations. Like, the third element is like, it doesn't have to be that complicated. The jargon exists, but at the end of the day, there's an analog for everything that we're doing in crypto, like within the sort of traditional space. And it's usually easier to learn the crypto side and understand it if you know the traditional side than the vice versa. Talking to crypto companies that, have supposedly done amazing things, so oftentimes they miss very basic components of what payments requires, or the reason why certain things can happen. I guess I get asked all the time, how long would it take for Worldpay to stablecoin sandwich itself? And for me, it's like, this is like not even a question I would even consider really answering. It just doesn't make any sense. So I would say like there's education from both sides that exists. But it is easier to learn the sort of crypto terminology primitives than vice versa, in my opinion.
100% agree. It's so funny. in a separate event that we were talking to Eric, I had a similar conversation. I was like, if you look at people, like if you're looking for talent, especially, it's easier to take somebody from the TradFi space and be like, hey, this is just a different kind of technology versus the other way around. Like you said, Ahmed, like you don't know how payments work, et cetera. But then starting from the crypto side of it and then moving into payments is actually a little bit harder, I think, from that perspective.
It wouldn't make sense because you're like, oh, in crypto, I'm used to just sending you to an address. But now I'm saying, no. There's like these 4 that we're going to add to the flow. And now you want to just plug in your crypto. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and you got to AML KYC and all these things, right? All these additional layers that come. Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. This was actually absolutely wonderful. This was a masterclass in not just like stablecoins in general, but really the day-to-day applications and then understanding the true application, right? Like what are the things to think about, how application actually looks like, how getting your customers to kind of think about it from a application perspective. All that was fantastic, and so really appreciate you guys being on the show. If you like this episode, check out our previous talks with Kevin Litnity of Borderless, Raj Parekh of Monad, and or Simon Babakani of Zebek for more real-world perspectives.